Thank you for joining us at today's Alumni Reunion Forum here at the John Hay Library. My name is Jennifer Betts. I'm the University Archivist here at Brown University. Today's forum is sponsored by the Brown University Library, the Brown Alumni Association, and the Nonfiction Writing Program Department of English. I am pleased to welcome all of you here today, and especially pleased to welcome Beth Taylor to the podium. She is a faculty member and co-director of the Nonfiction Writing Program here at Brown University. Thank you.
It's wonderful to see you all here, and in particular because we are celebrating the building of an archive that I hope many of you who are in the audience will help us to continue to build. It was initiated by David Taylor, class of 1966, and then after he gave me a handwritten list of names of veterans, I went to Paula DeBlois in the alumni office, and she helped us find more, and then we would contact one, and he would tell us about more. So slowly we're finding our Vietnam veterans who went to Brown. Over the past 7 years, several undergraduate and graduate students and staff have worked very hard on creating the archive, the website, and the exhibit. I want to thank each of them for their hours of labor and care. Amy Kurowski, Megan Towns, Erica Florens, Alora Vilken, Sarah Dilla, Alyssa Anderson, Robin Ness, Ben Tyler, Ray Booty, and our host today, Jennifer Betts, who you just saw. When you get a chance, you will notice that on the new website, the timeline and the resource list on the website cover much more than the stories of our veterans. The University Archives intends to expand the digital archive to cover all events of the 1960s and early 70s on Brown's and Pembroke's campuses, and the timeline and the resource list reflect that project to come. When David first emailed me about a Vets archive, I was happy to follow his lead, in part because I was teaching a course called Writing the Southeast Asian War. And I was working with students who were children of soldiers, or children of conscientious objectors, or children of refugees from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. I had also been writing about the young men I lost to the Vietnam War, to combat as a Marine, to Quaker service at Quang Ngai Hospital, and to prison after a protest. I understood how important it was to create oral histories or to find the letters, journals, and photographs of individuals to bring alive their histories. So today, we honor the start of the archive of Brown's Vietnam veterans. Our panelists, along with several veterans and widows in our audience today, have already donated their papers, photographs, letters home, and audio tapes to the archive. We are grateful to each of you. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Gus White, had a family emergency today and was unable to attend. Our panelists here today are David Taylor, Elaine Zimmer-Davis, and Barry Kowalski. They will introduce themselves and summarize their experiences in the war. Then we will open the floor to you in the audience who are a Brown or Pembroke alum, a veteran, or a widow. Please do share your story. We are going to use this videotape of this event as part of the archive, so see it as living history as you speak. When you speak, please use the microphone. Is the microphone nearby? There's supposed to be a portable microphone here. Jennifer can make sure that happens. What? Oh, come to the podium. Okay, excuse me. I hope that isn't too hard to do, but please, yes, come up to the podium. Please summarize your own story at 5 minutes or less. At 4:15, the Vietnam Veterans of America will present some artifacts of John Sherman, a Brown alumnus whose remains were recently discovered and returned from Vietnam. At 4:30, you are all invited to the commissioning ceremony of this year's ROTC graduates across the street on the lawn of University Hall. Then you will be honored along with these new graduates and our graduating veterans at a reception in Rhode Island Hall, over there, room 108. So our first veteran is David Taylor. David?
Thank you. Now, do you want me to speak from there?
Well, if you can stay comfortable there if it's working.
Is this mic hot? Thank you. I'm David Taylor, class of 1966, and I'd like to thank Beth for having the foresight to initiate this program. She gives me more credit than I'm really due. In fact, a fellow by the name of Jay Fluke, who's here at the university. Yeah, can't hear? Yeah, I'd like to thank Beth for initiating this program, but I'd also like to give credit to Jay Fluke, who was aware of her courses, and Jay was a fraternity brother, is the rugby coach, and he alerted me that perhaps I ought to contact her, so he ought to get a little credit in this as well. I'm amazed by the turnout on this forum. When this thing started, we assumed nobody wanted to hear our stories. They hadn't been heard for 30 years. We kind of dusted it under the rug and didn't really talk about it with family or friends. And it was probably 30 years before I was asked to stand up in church and raise your hand and tell them that you were a veteran, and people applauded you and thanked you for your service. And that was quite a shock. I'd like to recognize some of the fallen that I'm aware of, whose names should be in the annals. And there is Jerry Zimmer, who was a classmate, Phantom pilot. His widow is here. Charlie Piggott, another Phantom pilot. He was married to a Pembroker, class of 1966. I had the unfortunate experience of witnessing both of the incidents in which their aircraft went down. Ned Conley, class of 1965, he was flying Marine H-46s. John Sherman, whose remains will be, I guess, presented later. John was another Marine pilot, captain of the soccer team, flying 01 Bird Dogs. Fran Driscoll, F-4 pilot, captain of the basketball team, 1964. Derek Chesborough, who was a relative of among the first families here in Rhode Island and friend of Barry's, and he can go into that. Mike Carley, a Marine helicopter pilot, the Marine instructor here at Brown who received a Navy Cross, was instrumental in the recovery of Mike's body when the helicopter went down. And then I guess lastly, not a Brown graduate, but just to sort of tell you the quality of people that we were losing in this war. There was a friend of mine from Harvard who was H-46 pilot by the name of Bing Emerson, who was the great-great-grandson of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And if you think of the possibilities of these lives and the quality of people, it's just kind of mind-boggling. So at any rate, how did I end up where I did? My father was a B-29 crew member in World War II, flew all the stuff from Guam, and didn't really talk much about it. And my mother's lineage went back to Civil War, American Revolution, and whatnot. And so it sort of seemed like a logical thing that military was in your service. As you will all recall, in those days, a draft was mandatory. My father did not start working until well after the war, and then by the time he went to undergraduate school, he had children, graduate school, internships, et cetera. He was about 38 or so, and so I was probably 14 when my father took his first job, and my mother was a nurse and just did whatever was necessary, and we lived in a second-story commercial walk-up in a house in a rich town, and you just had to kind of figure out how are you going to make your way through through the program, and of course the military service seemed like the logical way. So as a kid, I gravitated towards seeking appointments at West Point, Annapolis, the newly formed Air Force Academy, and my brother was a year older than I was. He was recruited by Bobby Knight for basketball, but he opted at the end to take a Navy ROTC scholarship to Yale, where he ended up being captain of their team, and then told me about the program, and I came here to Brown. The Vietnam War was not on anybody's radar screen in 1962 when I arrived at Brown, and as a result, you kind of blithely go through the program. You're doing your summer tours in the Navy and whatnot, and would come back, and the Marine officer instructor here would kind of isolate the kids that he thought might either be enough of a reprobate that they would adequately perform or not perform in the Marine Corps, however the case may be. And he kind of selected the groups that he wanted and would then press you into taking the Marine option, which you could under the Navy program since the Marine Corps is funded by the Navy Department. So I rather naively took the Marine option and figured, well, this would be fun, and where's the worst you could go? Well, maybe you could go to Okinawa and sort of have fun and see the Orient and things like that. And I was sitting in a foxhole in Quantico in the summer of 1965 when Lyndon Johnson escalated the war, and they had an amphibious landing in Da Nang, and we had a bunch of rain. They called our 3-day war off, and I'm going, oh my God, what have I done? As a result, I came back to school and suffered probably through depression and withdrawal and perhaps a little too much alcohol and indulgence, recognizing what was coming. And as a result of that, I ended up being, or not a result, I ended up being commissioned in 1966 in June, and I sort of got out of here courtesy of Lyman Kirkpatrick, who was former Inspector General of the CIA, is that correct? And he realized I needed a couple grades to get out of here, and I'd probably be better off in the Marine Corps than I would be here at Brown, so I ended up down in Quantico. And in Quantico, in basic school, you kind of look around and you're being trained to be an infantry officer first and foremost, and as a regular officer, that's the primary thing that you do. And as soon as you're done, they give you a 45 and they give you a platoon, and you're over in Vietnam. And I could look around and see there's guys coming home in body bags and missing limbs, and figured this was not exactly what I was looking forward to. And I wasn't that good with math, but I realized that they kept talking about the war would be over in a year, and I could figure out that if you went to flight training for a year and a half, I could do the math, and I would add a year and a half to my commitment, and I went from 4 years to 5.5, and maybe that would be like just kind of a polite way out of the program. Well, war kept on going. It didn't work out like that, and I ended up completing flight training, having gone through the fixed wing program, the carriers, and then they put most of the guys into helicopters, with the exception of generally the kids who were taking a flight indoctrination program here at Brown, and you got your private pilot's license, and they would judge you on your first 25 hours of flight, and 95% of the Marines were going into helicopters, and the balance of them would get a jet selection. So bottom line of it is I ended up flying the CH-53, very fortunate to be in that aircraft. The CH-53, in case you don't know it, is an aircraft that weighs 72,000 pounds. It's a helicopter. It'll move at 200 miles an hour. We can seat 56 combat-loaded Marines. We had an external hook on the aircraft where we could pick up 20,000 pounds. One time when I was in California, picked up Eisenhower, who had a heart attack, and he's on the golf course in an ambulance, and we just drove the ambulance right up into late at night, drive the ambulance right up into the helicopter, lash it down, and took him off to a cardiac area. And those aircraft cost $115 million per bird, and if you don't think it's fun and heady experience, think again. That was a lot of fun flying those guys. And that's what I flew in Vietnam. I managed to get in 700 combat missions in about 1,000 hours while I was there. And it was a daily grind. You're out there. Some days you would fly 8 hours. Generally, you would not fly 2 days in a row. In our missions, I flew up in the DMZ mainly shortly after the Battle of Khe Sanh and shortly after the Tet Offensive in Hue. And I was not there for those battles, but I was there for the cleanup and the evacuation of Khe Sanh, and I was stationed a few miles south of Hue. It was a very, very dangerous area, a very, very dangerous time, and the war escalated while I was there. And the way the war worked over there was one of combat fire support bases. You're really in a very hostile country. We did not control any portion of that country except perhaps the big cities. So you got 95% hostile area that's jungle, it's mountains, and they came up with this theory of fire support bases where they would go out and they'd go to the top of a mountain. And when I say a mountain, these things are 3,500, 4,000 feet, but they're like being in the Andes, but it's kept that they're jungle. So you go from sandy flatlands to these incredible mountains. And the theory was that you go to the top of the mountains, you put the teams in, they will secure the mountain, they'll put a fire support base in there, and we would bring in the 105 howitzers, we would bring in the 155 howitzers, and then you bring the guys in, and then they run patrols from that area through the jungle to try and support this. And what they really didn't understand, I think, was the fact that these guys were totally infiltrated. They could scoot back over into Laos, they could scoot back into Cambodia. They had building tunnels underground forever, and so it was a very evanescent enemy that you really didn't see much. I'd like to say one of our other missions, of course, was that of medical evacuation. And the Sanctuary and the Repose were hospital ships that were stationed right offshore, and we had the capability to go in and recover these guys and get them to a Delta Medical facility, which was back in a place called LZ Stud or Vandegrift Combat Base. We could get them back there within 5 minutes from almost any site. The country's only 40 miles from Laos to the South China Sea, and you're moving along at 200 miles an hour. And if the injuries were really bad, traumatic brain injuries or missing limbs or whatnot, we'd get them to a clean environment on the Sanctuary or the Repose where they had better medical facility. But the key thing was that helicopters during Korea were very small aircraft. They didn't have lift capability. They didn't have jet engines. And the concept of vertical envelopment had not been developed. And it was in the process of being developed in Vietnam. And the CH-53 that I flew had an incredible lift capability, and logistics was the key to the war. I'd like to comment one thing and talk about whether the war was lost or whether the war was won. The kill rate in Vietnam was probably 10 to 1, almost every encounter. There was never a battle lost. And if we lost 58,000 people in Vietnam, the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong, the numbers were 500,000. And to think that the veterans carried around this stigma that they lost the war is just patently absurd. This war was lost by the failure of commitment and of what was going on in the United States. We did not have the ability to pursue across the border. We did not have the will to take the war, which was not a declared war. And so it would kind of like be going into a basketball game and saying you're going to walk off at half court and you're ahead 100 to 1 and you're not going to show up for the next half and then say we lost the game. It was lost politically. There were obviously huge mistakes made in understanding what the will and the capability of the South Vietnamese or North Vietnamese was. And unfortunately, I think those are some lessons that we have failed to learn and carry over today. So that's basically all. The other thing I mentioned, so post-career, I guess I was the youngest pilot and one of the more heavily decorated pilots and had high time in the CH-53. And Nixon was president at that point in time, and he was wanting to convert over to take a 747 as Air Force One, and they wanted to convert their Marine One fleet over to 53s from what's called the VH-1. And as a result, I went back to what's called HMX-1, which is the Presidential Helicopter Squadron, and I ended up flying Nixon for a couple of years there before I decided to retire.
Elaine Zimmer Davis. Why don't you put the microphone right in front of your mouth?
Try to do this from
And
here. Look at
Jennifer,
my note.
are you doing?
Am I? Can you hear me all right? No. Hello. Oh. Yeah. Oh God. Okay. I'm Elaine Zimmer Davis, and my first husband was Captain. Oh God. There. How's that? Oh my God. I'm gonna go try this better. I'm really sorry, everybody. Is it better? Okay, here we go. All right? All right. I'm Elaine Zimmer Davis, and my first husband was Captain Jerry Zimmer, USMC, an NROTC recipient of that scholarship, and class of '66. I met Jerry while I was at Bryant College, and Bryant at that time was just around the corner, and I think Brown owns everything now that was Bryant. And Jerry was a sophomore. We were fixed up on a blind date, and that was 3 years before we were going to get married, and we were inseparable during his time at Brown. We then were married a week after his graduation, and so the love affair had evolved into something, very real. Although Jerry and I didn't talk much about the Vietnam War, I knew he was doing everything that he could to prepare for it. We all knew there was a 13-month tour. That was the typical thing that everybody served, unless they were wounded or something like that. While at Brown, Dave was correct. A lot of the guys that ended up in fixed wing took advantage of a new program that ROTC students could attend. In this case, it was North Central Airport, and you could see if you did want to become a pilot. Jerry wanted that. That was what he wanted so badly, and he did want fixed wings, so when he did pledge to become a Marine rather than the Navy, kind of as David. I won't repeat what he did say, but basic school was the beginning of the Marine Corps commitment, and I was with him. There were not a lot of wives that were with their husbands at that time, simply because there was that fear of what might occur in the future. I never thought that way. I mean, Jerry was omnipotent to me, and once he finished his Quantico commitment, he knew that he was headed for Pensacola, which I'm sure David was as well, somewhat at the same era. And he wanted to fly the hot fixed-wing aircraft of the day, which was an F-4 jet, two-seater, supersonic jet. And there were guys, in fact, Charlie Piggott was with Jerry at that time, and a bunch of people that they had all served in ROTC together and would meet each other in the summer on summer cruises. So it was a pretty tight-knit group. And Carol Piggott and I were like this. I was pregnant, she had one, and we always lived, as we went through the training command with our guys, we lived next to each other or up top or below, in the kind of the one-room apartment. Jerry was really very excited. They competed heavily for F-4s. The Marine Corps did not have many like the Navy did, so it was tough. Studying was really part of it. Jerry and Charlie both managed to get F-4s, and so we were together from that point throughout the training command. By the time Jerry finished what was really 24 months, because it was 18 months to get through the jet training command, and then to get into an operational squadron. So it was about 24 months in all. We had moved approximately 7 times around the country. Stops in Virginia, Pensacola, Florida, Meridian, Mississippi, Kingsville, Texas, back to Pensacola, North Carolina, South Carolina. Along the way, I had our first child, a boy. He left me at the hospital and went flying and came back and had a son. Jerry was ecstatic about being a dad. He grew up on a dairy farm, which was very close-knit family, and he had all the skills of a dad. I'm not sure about me, but anyway. Our final stop before he deployed to Vietnam was at Beaufort, South Carolina. We loved it because it was the first time that we actually had sort of a normal military lifestyle. I hated to see it end because that meant that Jerry would be gone. I never thought in terms of gone meaning forever. But that's what happened on August 29th, 1969, after he'd been in country 6 months, when his aircraft was shot down in the Quai San Mountains of South Vietnam's Central Highlands. In 1 week's time, I was to meet Jerry in Hawaii for R&R, the vacation. But when a military vehicle pulls up to your house and your husband's serving in combat, every wife, every mom, every sister knows what that means. And I knew we weren't going to make it. Devastated is the only way that you can explain what that feeling, and it never leaves you. He was listed officially as KIA NBR, killed in action, no body recovered. I knew that probably a body wouldn't be recovered when you're traveling at supersonic aircraft. That really is a whole different ballgame. To say I was not prepared for that type of news would be an understatement. Jerry was an incredible pilot. The mission that he was on when he was shot down involved clearing a landing zone so a helicopter could insert a reconnaissance team in an area of the jungle that was triple canopy. So Jerry had come down low and fast, dropped his first load of 500-pound bombs to begin removing the vegetation, and was hit when he was pulling up immediately thereafter. When you consider the speed of a supersonic aircraft, he was probably going about 450 miles per hour. The enemy got lucky, and that's all I can say. Kind of when your number's up, you know. Jerry and his backseater never had a chance to eject. I know this because for the last 12 years I've spent going back and forth to Vietnam, and as I move along, you'll kind of understand. I'm moving quickly. Okay. I packed up Craig, bought a new car, moved to California 3 months after Jerry's death. Never been to California. We had hoped to be stationed at El Toro Air Station upon his return, and that was the primary reason I did that. A year after Jerry's death, I married Ron Davis, who was sitting there, and we've been together ever since. I could never have made it through the ups and downs that one goes through at a young age like that. If it were not for Ron, and who actually was a Marine helicopter pilot that lived across the street from me when my son Craig and I moved to California, I could never have imagined raising Craig alone. Ron left the Marine Corps and became an FBI agent very soon after we were married. Together we raised Jerry's and my son Craig, and along with our own biological son Brett. We're still married today, and in many ways, Ron is responsible for the success that we've had in tracking down Jerry's artifacts from his aircraft. And really, it was because of Ron that we were able to convince the government organization that looks for our MIAs from all past wars to reopen his case. They have done several phases of excavation, of which the most in 2012, Memorial Day, I was in Vietnam by myself. Vietnam is safer than any other place probably that you could visit. And I traveled to Jerry's crash site in an Mi-17 helicopter with the Vietnamese military and the U.S. officials. And it was probably the most amazing thing that ever happened. I have no hate in my heart for the Vietnamese. I visited the village below Jerry's crash site by myself with an interpreter, North Vietnamese interpreter, and they just opened their hearts to me as well. I hope that I'm really trying to make sure, because I know that Barry's got a wonderful presentation as well. There are slides that I took while I was at Jerry's crash site that, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, but they have been rotating through. And my blog site, for anybody that's interested in learning more about my journey, is bringingjerryhome.com. Thank you so much. It's so great to see all of you.
Now Barry Kowalski.
Well, every program needs balance, and David and Jerry were the heroes, and I guess I was, who was that character on MASH? Hawkeye. That was my role in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. I didn't fly anything. Those are my boots back there that I wore as a infantry lieutenant with 40 men walking around just north of the DMZ in Vietnam. How did I get there? The 60s was a decade, the historians tell us, of great social change. But the operative word really I've thought about is that it was a decade. It was 10 years. And the class of 66, we were right in the middle of those 10 years. That decade spanned the Beach Boys and the California Girls morphing into the Mama and the Papas and California Dreaming. There was a lot that happened in that decade. And there was no anti-war protests on this campus or any campus that I'm aware of that I remember in 1966. It hadn't started yet. That was something to come later. In 1965, there was the Great Spring Riot, which started as a food fight in the refectory. And some of us from the class of 66 last night were trying to figure out what that riot was all about. And it was a big deal. The Providence Police Department and the students were out here fighting in the streets. And nobody could remember for sure what it was about, but we knew it wasn't about any anti-war or any social change business. It was about being kids. You know, today's grads, I think, are probably worrying about jobs. We, David and I, and the males of 66, worried about the draft. It was going to get you one way or another. Either it would impact your life by you continuing to go to school, finding a medical deferment, finding a deferment by having a couple of kids, like one of our vice presidents did, something, or you would have to find a way to get into the military in a capacity that you wouldn't get shot at Vietnam. I didn't pay enough attention to it all, I guess. 1966 rolled around. I was graduating and going to go to law school, and I was very much against the war. I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever seen. I'm watching the stuff on TV, the Rusk hearings, and I'm thinking it's amazingly stupid. But, either I'd go to law school, which I didn't want to do, depending on my parents, and I went down and saw David at Quantico, and he's got this great romantic life at the swimming pool and this beautiful uniform. And so the next thing I know, because of a series of miscalculations, bad miscalculations, and too much alcohol, I'm one morning at the recruiter's office in the Marine Corps at 7th and F Street, Northwest Washington, D.C., getting sworn in, and I swear to God, his name was Captain Stud. And, and David had nothing on Captain Stud. So I traded my slot in law school for a Marine Corps enlistment. I actually had to stretch a quarter of an inch to make it to 5'6" to become a Marine officer. I guess only a Polish kid would be dumb enough to do that, right? Anyway, in August of '66, I was sworn into the Marine Corps. In February of '66, I was in OCS when I learned that my close friend, and he's pictured over there, of the Psi U fraternity, 15 of us, Derek Chesbrough in the middle was the president of the fraternity, and Derek had failed out of school and been drafted and went to OCS, and he was killed in Vietnam, and I learned that while I was in OCS down in Quantico. And Derek was awarded the Silver Star. It's hard to call him Derek, we called him the Master. The Master got the Silver Star, and on his citation, it read, as a forward observer, he was wounded once, refused medical evacuation, and continued to advance. He was wounded a second time, refused medical evacuation, and continued to advance. The third time he was wounded, he was killed. Derek died the hero's death he would have wished. In any event, then in July of '67, I learned the miscalculation and the truth of the mistake I had made. I was figuring that most guys in the Marine Corps weren't in the infantry, the tanks, and the artillery, which is true. Most guys are in supply and motor transport. And goodness, that's what they'll put me in, won't they? Especially if I ask for it. My graduating class of OCS, they made 97% of us infantry. And I had to go home and tell my pregnant wife that I was going to Vietnam as a Marine infantry officer. Them's the breaks. In November of '67, I became a platoon leader of the 3rd Platoon, Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, 3rd Marine Amphibious Force. A lot of threes in there, and I thought maybe I'd get lucky, and I did. And I was at Kamlo Bridge. I spent the next 6 months sleeping in holes in the ground, participating in patrols and ambushes within 1,000 meters of the DMZ. I was the only lieutenant in my battalion that wasn't killed or wounded. War was not only terribly dangerous, but it was very uncomfortable. You sleep outside in the rain when it's the rainy season, and in the heat with the bugs when it's the hot season. The supply system in combat is so bad that it ultimately catches up with you. At one point, I had 42 men in my platoon, and we had 38 pairs of trousers. Fortunately, we were in a stagnant position, and one man would come in, take his trousers off, give them to another man who would go out on guard duty. Finally, the pants caught up with us, and the bullets as well. But I guess I suppressed my anti-war views in favor of what became my life's purpose there for 6 months, and that was keeping me and 40 Marines alive. And that was it. That's what it became. There was nothing else in my life for 6 months except to make sure somehow that we all stayed alive. On May 10th, 1968, the NBA ambushed my company, Lima Company. We had 11 killed in about 20 minutes. That's 11 out of 110 men. That's 10%. As XO, it was my job to evacuate the dead as well as the wounded out. And the lowest moment of my life when I had to line up 11 dead Marines and get a helicopter to get them out of there, and somebody like David came in and got them out. Well, what I would say about being a small unit leader in combat is simply this. Your mission is not to kill. Your mission is to keep yourself and your men alive. And killing others is an unfortunate part of the mission. At my 2012 reunion of the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, I had some men from my platoon come over to the house for dinner. And one of them said, "Hey, Lieutenant, we got to give you a toast." And they still call you Lieutenant no matter what. I mean, we're all old men, but they still say sir and call me Lieutenant. And I said, Lieutenant, here's our toast to you. One thing we remember about you, Lieutenant, you never volunteered us for nothing.
Thank each of you for those very compelling testimonies, and I hope that's role modeling for many of you in this audience what we want from you in our archive. So if you're interested in donating your papers, your letters, your stories by email, I can call you, record your story for the archive. Please let me know, or Jennifer Betts know. And now I want to open to the audience. Okay. Any of you who would like to just stand up, and Jennifer will bring, actually, can you come over here, because I know I want to begin over here with Connie Worthington, whose husband is the photograph in your program, and then anybody else, just very brief story of what happened. Thank you.
What a thrill. Mike was so proud of that photograph in that helicopter, so it was really wonderful to walk in and see that. Thank you very much. And again, Beth, thank you for the healing that you have started among so many of us. Can you can't hear? Very close. As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of study dates with Mike Carley before the game up there. But my story goes on. You can read the sort of Vietnam reminiscence on the website link that the library has put out today. But even in the midst of my happy years with Terry Tullis, I will always identify myself as a Vietnam widow. The death of Mike Carley near Duc Pho in Quang Ngai province changed my son's life, my life, our families, our values, our community, and Brown. Michael Jr. was 2 when his father was killed, February 27, 1967. And I continued as a transfer student to finish my BA here at Pembroke. And I was under the wing of faculty, especially Lyman Kirkpatrick, whose son was in the Marine Corps at that time, and Mike's fraternity brothers from AD Phi. Thank you, guys. There's someone else here that I need to just, without identifying him, say that shortly after Mike's death, I went to see The Graduate. First, I went with some of my girlfriends from high school. We laughed and laughed and laughed. And then I went with these 2 guys, and we came out chilled to the core because Vietnam was waiting for them. 20 years later, I was in a London NGO teaching office skills to a young Vietnamese woman. We looked at each other one day in the middle of ordinary conversation with a stunning moment of recognition. Mike had been an invader, and her uncle had been a sniper. 47 years later, our extraordinary trip to explore the country Mike Carley thought was so beautiful, in every tape, in every letter, and where he was also witness to torture and napalm strikes. A driver was arranged to bring us with incredible speed and alacrity, sometimes a very exciting drive, particularly Terry in the passenger seat. We went to the former Ugly Angels base. Mike and a few other alumni had established the Brown Club of Ki Ha in 1966, a story and a picture that my father printed in the Brown Alumni magazine, distributed just after Mike's death. The driver, Luke, had very little English. We'd had to phone the tour director to translate communications during the day. But he stood before me outside the gates of Ki Ha, which was now Vietnamese and closed to us. I fought the Americans. Of course you did. We were in your homeland. We did not belong there. Where did you fight? Chu Lai. Oh, the jets, not the helicopters. He smiled ruefully and nodded. I took his hand, 47 years late. We drank iced coffee, thick and black. Terry looked the other way as Michael and I toasted him with our uncertain, treacherous iced tea. We'll drink it fast, Mike said. And good pho in a street-side restaurant, open, full of heavy smokers, the proprietress selling lottery tickets and stroking my face. She had no wrinkles, and she was 75. Then Look took us beyond Chu Lai, near Duc Pho, as directed in an email that morning from Jim Hippert, who was Mike Sr.'s pilot that day. It's just amazing that we had email from halfway around the world and 12 hours away to tell us where to go. What an age we live in. There were plenty of rice paddies, however, to choose from. They all looked alike, and they're everywhere, and they're green and beautiful. But we picked one by a dirt road. Waiting for a bus, a small, broadly grinning woman, her plucky granddaughter and reticent daughter came forward, touched my hair. There aren't a lot of white-haired people in Vietnam. Touched my hair, chatted with gestures that we sort of understood, and embraced me before we drove away. I kept imagining the pulsing thunder of helicopters, but there were none. Only road sounds, cars and motorbikes, and in the rice paddy, a blackbird perched on the tip of a stalk, singing to the air, singing the song of blackbirds in Europe and of our American robins, universal and timeless. I've been listening to the robins a lot these past days, and I'm very grateful for this chance to share the after story with you.
So I want to encourage anyone who feels so moved. I'm going to look at some of you and smile, but I know in the audience we have Jim Gardner in the back. We also have Peter Wayman here. We have Manny Menendez. We have Rico Kalaluka, perhaps. We have Andy Padden, perhaps, and John Phillips, and maybe Hal Chorney, and any others that I don't necessarily know about. Could some of you come up and use the microphone? Okay, then Jennifer.
I don't need the microphone.
Oh, you will? Okay, that's fine.
Don't use the microphone. So, I'm a contemporary class of '66 with David and Barry and the rest of the class that was very active in Navy ROTC and in the Marine Corps. Say your name. Oh, my name is S. Paul Bryant. Sorry. I'm so used to judges that people know who the hell I am. So, anyway, I was appointed to Annapolis my senior year in high school. Yale thought I was a Yale recruit. Yale thought I was going to Annapolis, so they withdrew my acceptance. Came to Brown. They got appointed again to Annapolis at the end of my freshman year at Brown. Didn't go, but I figured that there's no way of avoiding the draft or anything else. So I signed up for a thing called the PLC Marine Corps program, which drove my father, who was an avid Navy person, right off the point. This is the only time he used the F-bomb at me in my entire life was that moment. I, like David, I was supposed to be a lawyer in the Marine Corps. What's called the PLC law, which is a special program to develop lawyers. I graduate from Brown, but I'm not yet accepted to law school. So UCLA accepts me in July when I'm already at the basic school, these guys. And so the colonel in Washington says, well, we want you to go to law school. But like David's issue, I had to give them now extra years because I was already on active duty. So I didn't think that was a good idea, so I figured, oh, I'll go to Vietnam, but instead I'm going to be a logistics officer. So I go to logistics school after the basic school, and I learned firsthand that they can't read English at Headquarters Marine Corps. They said, where do you want to go? I put down the East Coast. And instead, they sent me to the Far East Coast. Then they designate me as a logistics officer, which I think is great. And you've heard the names just a few minutes ago. So I wind up, General Nickerson sends me to Chu Lai, to the 3rd Battalion, 11th Marines. But I still carry a logistics MOS. At the 3rd Battalion, 11th Marines is a major named Al Gray, who becomes Commandant Al Gray under the President Reagan. Al Gray has a very unique viewpoint of Marine officers. He tells me he doesn't need a logistics officer, and he and I, not the battalion, he and I are going on a combat mission with the Koreans and the South Vietnamese the next day. So my attempt to be a logistics officer was a total failure, except I was lucky enough to be the logistics officer for the famous sniper unit on Hill 55, Carlos Heathcock, and the famous Marine Corps Sniper Company. So I stole the 50 calibers they had from the Army. We got the Navy field glasses from the Missouri. So there was little that the sniper unit had that wasn't stolen, or I don't think I got stolen. The last thing I want to say is, because his name kind of gets lost in the shuffle in our class, there was a Navy pilot who was with me in San Diego, actually a day or two before he was killed, named Fran Hourihan. And he was an anti-submarine warfare co-pilot, I think. And he was killed in an accident, a crash that occurred off the coast of San Diego in mid-1968. So because Fran wasn't killed in Vietnam, he kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But he was as committed as everybody else, whether Navy, Marine, Air Force, Army. And thank you very much.
So I don't like to point in class, but Peter? Yes, please do.
My name is Peter Wayman, and I'm actually the class of '63 at Brown, although I didn't graduate until '64. I had trouble getting through my biology course, and anyway, when I graduated in '64, I made my way down the road to OCS to go to Officer Candidate School, and I was commissioned in 1965 and immediately went to afterward to Norfolk, Virginia, where I was on an oiler tanker for the Navy for 18 months. And I had a 9-month tour in the Mediterranean as part of the 6th Fleet. And the Mediterranean is really tough duty, stopping at, Barcelona and Athens and other places. And then we spent the winter months down in the Caribbean. As a young officer, I felt probably somewhat entitled to oversee shore duty, and I had in mind London. Paris would have been okay, Naples, Rome, Athens. And my orders came through to the what's called the Paris of the East, Saigon. Unlike many people, I had a very good tour there. I came out alive, unscathed, as far as I know. For 6 months, I was an advisor to the Vietnamese Navy. And as such, I took one trip down to the Gulf of Thailand on a ship a small ship that had a medical van welded to the deck. I went down with a Navy corpsman, and I really felt, even at the time, that I was saying, we're from the government, we're here to help. And the Vietnamese were not particularly interested in their central government's support of them. And as I came to find out about the Vietnamese, whom I really do adore, for the 6 months I worked with them, they were interested in what we came to call the 4 F's of farming, fishing, family, and procreation. And having not distinguished myself in this effort, I then transferred to the headquarters of the Naval Forces Vietnam in Saigon as a protocol officer, and we coordinated with General Westmoreland's staff. This was from September 66 until September 67. And as part of that job, we got to meet many of the dignitaries and government people coming over from Washington to see what was going on in the war. And it was always interesting for me, with my driver, to go out to Tan Son Nhut Airport to meet the Pan Am round-the-world flight that was bringing them in, and to have them look around and say, we're in a war zone. And my driver had a very good sense of humor about greeting these people. And we happened to be in a station wagon that had a brick thrown at the windshield. And as we met 2 people who were a little jet-lagged coming in from Tan Son Nhut, they said, my gosh, what happened to your windshield? And without cracking a smile, my driver said, it's nothing, it's ricochet, it happens all the time as we drive through the streets. And we could see these poor jet-lag guys sinking into the back seat. But my office, for the few Navy personnel who were in Vietnam, mostly down in the Delta as swift boat operators, we did keep in touch with what was going on there. And my office had to draft the letters that our admiral sent to the families of those who were lost in Navy, and that was always a wake-up call to me. But when I came back from Vietnam, I was actually, the end of my active duty, assigned to the amphibious base in Little Creek, Virginia, where I got to teach Vietnam-bound naval personnel, and as part of their 3-week preparation before going to Vietnam, and that was always a very balanced experience for me, remembering what parts of Vietnam were like. So I just wanted to add too, and I live in the Washington, D.C. area now, and I frequently visit the Vietnam Memorial, which is always, if you haven't done, how many of you have seen the Vietnam Memorial? Good, a lot of you have. It's always a moving experience, as is if you haven't been down to the National Marine Corps Museum in Quantico. That too is a wonderful site to spend more than a day at, especially the Vietnam section that there are several docents there who served in the war, and it's always a moving thing to go down there and realize what so many other people went through in the Vietnam War, and I consider myself lucky. So, thanks.
And now, Jim Gardner.
I'm Jim Gardner. I supposedly am in the class of 65. I ended graduating with Dave Taylor, Jerry Zimmer, who I knew, Charlie Piggott, who I knew, and other people. I was commissioned in the Navy in an organization called the Civil Engineer Corps, commonly known, most people, as the Seabees. Once I got my commission, though, I took a 2-year leave of absence and got a master's degree also here as an engineer. First, we all were familiar with the Vietnam War because we all, who are old enough, watched it on John Cameron Swayze in 1953, Diem Diem Phu. And then, if you read The Quiet American, I can lead somewhat into what I did, but I was not The Quiet American. And also, in retrospect to what you said, if you have not seen the memorial to the Korean War and the Vietnam War down on the lower campus, please go there. That's also moving, and I try to visit at least as often as I can. In the Navy, there's something called a detailer. And in '68, I initially was told I would probably go to Vietnam, and we just had a friend of the family killed there in the Marine Corps. So, and my mother was distraught. So it was put off, and it worked out well. My first duty station was an ammunition depot in Portsmouth, Virginia. The commanding officer was named J.J. Herrick, who had had a destroyer squadron in the Gulf of Tonkin. And then, of course, '68 was the Tet Offensive. Pentagon Papers came out, and finally, then I taught at the Naval Academy for 2 years, which was wonderful duty. But then I went to my detailer, and my detailer said, well, you know, you were going to Vietnam, so you're going to Vietnam. And he said, you're the staff civil engineer for the Studies and Observations Group. And I said, and what do they do? And he said, I don't know. I don't know. Of course, that was post-Pentagon Papers. Pre, it was called Special Operations Group. And why was someone in the Civil Engineer Corps going there? Is because we did all the support for the psychological warfare people. We did all the special forces, the SEALs, we had the Marine recons, and we were a very subtle organization, very subtle. We were not in MACV, we were on Pasteur, right near Saigon, and we were very subtle. We all had black vehicles, black airplanes, you name it. And at night, sometimes it was war paint. And luckily, I got war paint on me one time, but it's another story. They said, you want to have a good time tonight. This was our Marble Mountain facility, and I thought it was going into Da Nang. It was going on an ambush. And I said, you don't want me. He said, but I had one weapon that most people didn't have over there because I could fit it in a briefcase. It was an Uzi, and it had a different sound than everyone else's. Didn't sound like an AK-47, didn't sound like an M16. But one thing everyone should remember is, for many people, it's tough for them to talk about what they did there. And it was emotional, people that had boots on the ground, and some of those people went through some pretty severe stuff. And some of the people, by the way, that work for us, I mean, special forces types are pretty tough people, but they went through a lot of tough times. But what did the Studies and Observations Group do prior to that? We also did civil affairs. In the Highlands, we would build schools and stuff like that. Some of you may have heard of John Paul Vann. I got to meet John Paul Vann. Because I was there towards the end, 71 and 72. And in fact, in April of '72, they shipped us all out. All of us went out. But we also had JPRC, which was the POW recovery group. The head of that was the other person from Brown. He was a Marine Corps lieutenant colonel. I never traveled in a helicopter when I was there. I went, because my wife didn't want me to, I kept that promise. I went to some pretty grim places by Jeep and came on one that was mangled one day. But there was no body around because, at least with the Jeep, if you hit something, you were ejected. But very important to us also were the Marine Corps. They did most of our insertions by chopper. And the insertions, when I was there, they stopped doing them up north, but we still were doing them into other parts of Southeast Asia. I handled a contract for something called Eastern Construction Corporation, a Filipino organization, and I had people working for me all over Southeast Asia. We weren't supposed to be there necessarily, but we were there. And also, I mean, I don't look like a warrior, but I also advisor to something called the Strategic Technical Directorate. Just a very subtle name. It was the Vietnamese Special Forces. But what got me there? Probably my Brown education and the fact that the Navy controlled all the money because you can bury a lot in an aircraft carrier. So, but also part of my Brown education probably did in what I read, because I had a very strange interview one time at Seacoast, which was the officer school for civil engineer corps people, and this person kept asking me, what do you read? What do you think about this? What do you, and I guess I passed the test, and it was the CIA test, so I was there. But it was a tough war. It was a very tough war. And the Vietnamese, and I'm glad to see that we're open to them now, they might shoot at you, but they were wonderful people. They were bright, and they were hardworking people. And that's basically all I have to say. And thank you.
So we have time for one more story before our presentation. Anybody?
There's somebody here from more recent 1996, Woody Moore.
Oh, we also have a we also have a vet.
Maybe we can hear from Woody later if there's a chance, because
Okay,
he's got
but-
a more contemporary view.
Are you? That's probably. I'm sorry. We probably don't have time for everybody right now. But are you one of our veterans?
Yes.
Yes. You're Hal. It's been a while. I haven't seen him in 5 years. So.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Harold Chauny. I was in the class of 1961. I didn't plan on going to Vietnam, but I ended up there. And whatever story I had in mind has changed, because when I listened to Dave, you talked about Mr. Emerson getting shot down. Well, Dave Emerson was the father of that pilot. I flew with him I flew with Dave out of Hanscom Field with the reserves after I got off of active duty at Dover Air Force Base. And Dave found out about his son being shot and killed on a trip that I was with him. And he was distraught. It's a very sad memory, but what I'd like to say is I'd like to thank John Rowan from the Vietnam Veterans of America, the Disabled American Veterans, and all those groups that are here to support the veterans and help them heal after some very bad things. Thank you very much.
And with that, it's a perfect segue to introducing John Rowan, the National President of the Vietnam Veterans of America.
Good afternoon. Unlike all the illustrious Brown graduates, I was an enlisted guy. And I was Air Force, which none of them, well, I think the last gentleman said he was Air Force, right? You said you were an Air Force guy. So I have lots of friends who were Marines, and actually we were rethinking about one of my colleagues from New York who may have been in your platoon. Unfortunately, lost a leg up there. In any case, what we're here to do today is to make a presentation to Brown from VVA, but really not from us. But it bears a little bit of a story that I would hope to be able to convey to you today. And I think it gives you an idea of some of the things that we've been involved in as an organization. For over 20 years, VVA has been going to Vietnam with a program called the Veterans Initiative. It was originally Veterans to Veterans Initiative. Now we just call it the Veterans Initiative. And what we've been doing is taking material and information from our membership and bringing it over to the Vietnamese as part of a dialogue on the whole MIA issue. Primarily, most of the material that, quite frankly, we bring the Vietnamese is mostly with regards to mass grave sites. And for example, to date, we believe that we've returned to the Vietnamese people 299 case files. Those are individual issues. So that may be a letter that somebody took off a dead body, or a piece of somebody's rucksack, or whatever. Some personal identification that could go back and identify that warrior to the Vietnamese. They don't have the DNA capability that we have, so if we can get any kind of remains, we can pretty much find out who they are with modern science today that we've been able to develop. And they've also believed that they've accounted for a possible 13,000 Vietnamese veterans. Again, mostly in mass grave sites. In doing this, quite honestly, it's a little bit selfish on our part. We've been doing this to basically establish a relationship with them. And we have a very good relationship with them. I think one of the gentlemen was pointing out earlier about the Vietnamese and what they think of them. I can tell you one thing, the Vietnamese love Americans. While we may have been blowing the place up and people were getting killed left and right, we were also setting up orphanages, we were building hospitals, we were taking care of the wounded on both sides. We did a lot of humanitarian things and philanthropic kinds of things throughout our whole time there. And so when we left, the Russians came in. And frankly, the Russians were not as nice. They were rather boorish, to be truthful. And the Vietnamese didn't like them very much. And so when the Americans started to trickle back in again, they were very happy. The other reality is something like 70% of the country was born after the war ended. They have no clue, except who they see today. This is an interesting story. So in January of 2015, at our 24th Veterans Initiative mission, we exchanged information. And as a result, we, as I say, have been highly regarded by the Vietnamese Veterans Association, which is an interesting correspondence. It's really interesting to talk to some of my colleagues who sat across the people they were shooting at and vice versa. But they've been very helpful in many ways about finding out information about our MIAs. Literally, the people who are involved in this program for the government can tell you that they've had situations where some old guy will come in and say, listen, this guy got crashed in my backyard, we buried him in a corner, you want him, come get him. And we have, and they have, and they did, and they've recovered a significant amount of remains from them. Well, recently in this trip, because of this trip, we had a Vietnamese television producer working with a Vietnamese veteran, stopped by our Silver Spring headquarters. By the way, Moki Porter's our director of communications. She's our protocol officer. Her parents work for the State Department. You know, you get into fun stuff. So anyway, this lady, Min Lee, was assisting Nguyen Yi Chi with a special request. On March 25, 1966, in Quang Ngai Province, Mr. Chi witnessed the crash of an F-8E Crusader, which had been dive bombing enemy positions when it was struck by ground fire. That's what we've learned since. They buried the body near a crash site, and in 1990, they disinterred the remains and turned them over to the Joint U.S.-Vietnam accounting team in that site. But Mr. Chi kept a watch and a knife. Time had passed, and he wanted to return these items to the family, but had no name and no place to begin his search. So he came to VVA for help. Armed with the date and location, we were able to identify a pilot who was lost in the spring of '66 in Quang Ngai Province. We printed out John Brooks Sherman's picture, and Mr. Lee and Mr. Chen showed it to Mr. Chen, and the positive ID was given. So then the next hard part, locating the next of kin. Unfortunately, with many of the KIAs from Vietnam, the next of kin aren't any. They're all passed away after all these years. But as a result of a message on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial virtual wall, which I encourage you all to look at, It's a very interesting wall. It's about all of the killed in action. It tells you information about each individual person, and if you have any connection to them, you can leave a message. And a message was found entitled My College Soulmate, posted on 9/26/06, and the connection to Brown was made. It was posted by a Captain Julian W. Freeman, who said, "You flew the Marine F-8, I flew the Air Force F-100." A search of the Brown website led to a digital bookplate established in the memory of John Brooks Sherman, which led us to Patricia Putney. Is Patricia here? No, unfortunately, okay. Who had established the digital bookplates for your library's endowment. She was the angel who went to great lengths to research the family, found out that the next of kin were deceased, and located his final resting place, which is next to his mother and father in Winter Haven, Florida. When they bring remains back after all these years, it's up to the family where they go. Some people opt to go to Arlington, and the honors obviously with that. Some prefer to go to their family plots, closer to home. In any case, on this Memorial Day, it is our honor to present to the Brown University with the personal possessions of your captain, John Brooks. This is what's left of his watch and a knife that he carried with him. There is also some notes in here telling a story about Mr. Lee, Ms. Lee, and also, let's see what else we got. There's also a note, I believe. Yeah, if anybody who's Vietnamese is good enough to read this, mine's dunk, so I can't read the Vietnamese anymore. But anyway, thank you to these, and it comes in this amazing box that the gentleman had put this stuff in many years ago. So it's our great pleasure, given especially in light of the work that's been done here in this library and your recognition, to present these two items for your collection to honor your graduate. I would just like to say, I want to, here you go, thank you. I want to thank Peter. Peter is a brand new life member of EVA, having joined just the other day on his way up here from Virginia. And it was kind enough to stop by our headquarters and brought some of our material up. So there's some things in the back. If they've all disappeared, please see me later. I'll be happy to give you my business card. We'd love to have all the Vietnam veterans, obviously, as members. Despite our old age, we're still growing as an organization, and we would welcome everybody. And I really want to thank Brown for doing this. It's, it's not too many people think that, especially in the Vietnam era, that the Ivy Leagues and other colleges was a place to hide. Well, some people did hide for quite a long time, some of them, which I always love these guys. I don't know how you get 3 consecutive deferments for going to a religious school and becoming a minister. How many times over, I don't know. But the reality is many people, like the gentleman you've heard earlier, even if you got, I'm kind of in that same ballpark. I graduated high school in '63, dropped out of college in '64, ended up in the Air Force in '65, and finally went back to school after I got out. I didn't go to anything nice like Brown, though. I went to Queens College and Hunter College. But I really want to say, though, that the one kid in my high school class, and I went to an all-boys high school of 1,500 in my graduating class. Only one of us got killed in Vietnam. And he was one of the ones who graduated from college afterwards in 1967 and got drafted. So again, thank you all for this. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for doing this wonderful reminiscence for your classmates.